Let's get into another episode of Whatever Happened to. Let's talk about the beautiful comedian actress Yvette Wilson. Now, Yvette Wilson was born and raised in Los Angeles, California, and she was the youngest of three siblings. And ever since she was a little girl, she was always trying to help somebody. She liked to help people. That was the type of person she was, just a nice and helpful person. If her friends needed somewhere to stay, if they were hungry, needed clothes or whatever, she wanted to help them. And this is when she was young, growing up. Now, after graduating high school, she attended San Jose State University and majored in communications. And it was during her time there she discovered her love for acting and telling jokes. They say what happened was she had lost a bet to one of her friends, so she had to perform some stand-up comedy at a club. But when she did that, she loved the reaction the crowd gave her. And from that day on, she went on to pursue it as a career. And I want to say, I think her first TV appearance was on Showtime at the Apollo, if I'm not mistaken. And then I remember her being on Def Comedy Jam. Me personally, I first saw her on Def Comedy Jam back in the day. And it's special because she was actually in the first episode with Joe Torre. Wow. Martin was the host, but she was on the first episode of Def Comedy Jam. Now, after that, she ended up doing some episodes on A Living Color, which was big at the time. She had a little role in the movie Poetic Justice. But then she landed the role as Lynette on the show Thea. She played her sister on the show. Y'all remember that show Thea? Brandy was on there, Jason Weaver. I thought it was a good show. It was a good show. I thought it was anyway. She was in House Party 3. She was on the part when Showboat showed up with the girls and the Rockwilders when Kid and Play was getting sized for the wedding. Somebody tried to say she was in House Party 2, but I don't remember seeing her in there. They must be getting her confused with Queen Latifah or something. She was in there on part 2, but I would have remembered if she was been on there because I don't watch all the House Party movies 100 times. But she was in part 3 though. Now, after that, she was in the classic movie Friday. She was Smokey's blind date that showed up. She told Smokey on the phone that she looked like Janet Jackson, and Smokey said she looked like Freddie Jackson. Classic movie, man. Now, she was also in the movie Don't Be a Menace to South Central While Drinking Your Juice in the Hood. She was the nurse. She was the nurse that gave Shawn Wayans the cup of water to drink from her breast. But when she played Andale on the show Moesha, and then later on joined the cast of the Parkers, that's where she really showed her acting skills. That's when she really blew up. We really got to see her comedic side. I grew up on them shows. Moesha had like 5 or 6 seasons. The Parkers had like 5 seasons too. And both of those shows were #1 for a long time. Andale had that spot. She had that spot where all the kids would hang out at. Man, there was some great TV shows back then, man. But anyway, now, after that, once the Moesha and the Parkers thing was over, she ended up, her and her husband, Jerome Harry, they started a record label called Fat Daddy Records. And they was working with a rapper named Rabbit from Oakland. And I remember that name, Rabbit, too. I remember his name being connected to actor Lamont Bentley, who y'all know as Hakeem on the show Moesha. I remember his name. But she and her husband, they got into the music business, and what people didn't know is Yvette was deep into the hip-hop culture. She loved hip-hop. Now, she also started her own film company and was working on a movie that she had directed called Mr. Boulevard Crenshaw Nights. But see, here's the thing though. She had some health issues going on. And she ended up getting real sick. And she found out she had cancer, but she beat that cancer. But then she had to fight a kidney disease in which she needed a kidney transplant. And you know what? One of her friends since the 3rd grade, her best friend named Eileen, gave her one of the kidneys too. Wow. God bless her for doing that. That's a real friend right there. Her best friend gave her a kidney. But then later on, cancer came back. And when it came back this time, it came back very aggressive as stage 4 cervical cancer, which, put her out of work. And that's when some close friends of hers, well, one of her friends named Jeffrey Piddle, who also worked in the TV business and was a stage 4 cancer survivor himself, he decided to create a GoFundMe page for her to help collect money to cover her medical needs and her medical bills, as well as her transportation to go back and forth to her doctor's appointments, right? And you know what? Yvette, she still refused to help because she wasn't that type of woman. She didn't want nobody, she didn't want to bother nobody with her issues because she was one of those people that was always helping other people. They say her friends had to beg her permission to set up a donation fund website. They wanted people who really loved her to help her out because they knew she was always helping people. They was trying to raise like $25,000 to get her the best care for her illness, and I think they got up to $13,000 in donations, but on June 14th, 2012, Yvette Wilson died from cervical cancer. And it's sad because according to her mother, she said Yvette prepared everybody for her passing, leaving specific instructions, including that she didn't want a funeral, but a party instead, and she wanted to be cremated. Yvette didn't want a lot of people to know that she was sick like that. She didn't want anyone to know which hospital she was in or nothing because she was concerned about how she looked. But Jamie Foxx, he went to see her anyway because they was real good friends. She used to tour with him back in the day. And her family and friends say she never complained about her illness. She remained hopeful and still went to church until she couldn't attend anymore and would just watch the service on TV. But as far as her funeral, she didn't want people to cry. She wanted everybody to celebrate her passing, and she even planned the party's menu. Wow, she was strong, man. Strong woman, man. And a lot of the cast members from the shows, Moesha and the Parkers, did show up to her memorial. And in an interview, somebody asked Monique, would there ever be a reboot of the Parkers? And she said, just can't do it because her sister Andell, Yvette Wilson, wouldn't be there. It just wouldn't be right. And she got a point. She does have a point because it wouldn't be the same, and Tommy Ford played the father in the Parkers. So that's why I think the Martin show, I don't think that'll be rebooted either because you just can't replace Tommy, Even though, the show Moesha, Andell was part of that too. Bernie Mac, Merlin Santana, Lamont Bentley's. Some shows you just gotta leave them as they are. It's just a part of history now and will never be forgotten. So I just rather just watch the reruns on TV and just let it take me back in time, man. UPN had some great black shows at that time. UPN had some good shows back. You think about it, they had some good shows, man. Yvette Wilson, man, 48 years old. Rest in peace, Yvette Wilson. Now, let's get into another episode of Whatever Happened To. Let's talk about the original Lionel, Mike Evans. Now, Mike Evans was born in Salisbury, North Carolina, and his parents had good professional jobs. His father, Theodore Evans Sr., was a dentist, and his mother, Annie Sue Evans, was a school teacher. And they made sure Mike had a good education by putting him in private school. Now, later on, his parents ended up moving to Los Angeles when he was still a child. And after he graduated high school, he went to Los Angeles City College to study drama and acting. Now, while in college, he ended up landing the part of Lionel Jefferson on Norman Lear's hit 1970s TV show called All in the Family. Now, how he got that role, right? Because see, when they was casting for the Lionel Jefferson role, Norman Lear really wanted actor Cleavon Little to have that role. That's who his mind was set on. But the people on his staff, they convinced Norman to find a young, brand new, fresh actor who was less threatening to go against Carol O'Connor, who played Archie Bunker. For some reason, they felt Cleavon Little would have been a little too threatening to go against Archie Bunker on the show. So when it came time for casting for the Lionel role, right, they saw and met about 50 young male actors, but none of them just weren't what they was looking for. And one day, Mike Evans was hitchhiking. He was just trying to get a ride to get to where he was going, right? And a black guy had picked him up who just happens to be an actor. And he told him he was on his way for audition at CBS Studios because they was looking for a black actor. So Mike just thinking, okay, he just decided to go with him and give it a shot. Even though he had no real acting experience on his resume. And he auditioned and they gave him the role of Lionel Jefferson with no experience. Wow. I mean, he was going to school for acting, but he actually never did no real acting. He was never in a play in school or nothing, but to the casting staff, when he got there, in their mind, he had the right look. And even though his acting wasn't that great at the time, they just figured he would get better if they worked with him. Now on the show All in the Family, Mike noticed that most of the actors on the show had their own writers and they was getting more screen time, and that's where Eric Monty comes into play. Now, when it comes to Eric Monty, his story is so inspirational. Look, what people don't know is he never wrote a script. Eric Monty never wrote a script until he got to Hollywood. He didn't write it back in Chicago. He didn't write a script till he got to Hollywood. He was so determined to leave Chicago that he hitchhiked for 2 years until he got to Hollywood. Wow. That's crazy. But look, anyway, Eric Monty ended up going to college on a GI Bill he had because he had went to the Army when he dropped out of school. And while in college, he wrote a play called If They Come Back, which became very popular locally around the way. It got to Mike Evans, and when he read it, he loved it. He saw the play, he loved it. So when Mike met Eric, he asked him, could he do some writing for him? He wanted Eric to write about his character, Lionel Jefferson, on the All in the Family show because he wanted Norman Lear to give him some more lines on the show. And that's when Eric wrote him a script and created his parents in the process. He created George and Louise Jefferson. And when Mike gave the script to Norman Lear, he loved it and hired Eric as a writer. Now, here's the crazy part. Now hired as a writer to Norman Lear in 1971, Eric created a whole script for the Jeffersons. He created the Jefferson Show. And when him and Mike gave it to Norman Lear, he turned it down and said it would never work. Wow. Then Eric wrote the script for the show Good Times, right? Him and Mike, they put together the Good Times show. And Norman Lear turned that down because he didn't want a black father on the show. But then years later, Norman Lear, right, he changed his mind once he got the green light for Esther Road to do a spinoff show for Maude. And you know what? He decided to go with the script he had, Good Times. And when he showed Esther Rose the script, Esther Rose, she loved the script, but she demanded she have a husband. And you know, the rest is history. You know, it was a bunch of drama. You can check out on Good Times. You can check my Good Times episode I did on the channel while y'all want to really get deep into it. Now, after that, Eric Monty, he quit and left Norman Lear's production company, right? And he did his Cooley High. The Cooley High movie was successful. And, Mike Evans was still there working with Norman Lear. And that's when he asked Norman Lear, could he get a spinoff show? He wanted to get more shine on the screen. And that's when Norman Lear decided to go with Mike and Eric Monty's other idea that he said would never work, which is the Jeffersons. And you know what? The Jeffersons ended up becoming one of the longest running sitcoms in TV history. It's crazy because when Norman Lear said, okay, let's do it, Weezy Jefferson, Isabel Sanford, she was the holdup on that show. She said she was just scared to death to be the lead person on the show because she only had 6 lines on All in the Family, and she was just cool with that, just playing that role. But anyway, the first season of the Jeffersons, right, Mike Evans, he started to feel like they weren't giving him enough lines and on the screen action. Alongside his TV girlfriend, wife Belinda Tolbert, who played Jenny, the mixed daughter of Tom and Helen Willis. Plus, he was already feeling some kind of way. Him and Eric Monty, they created the show and they weren't getting no credit. So according to Jimmy Walker, better known as J.J. Evans to the world from Good Times, he said he was right there the day they fired Mike Evans from the show. Now, Jimmy Walker said in an interview that everybody was at a Christmas party, right? And he was talking to Norman Lear and some other staff members when all of a sudden Mike Evans walked up and told Norman Lear that he needed more lines on the show. Mike Evans was going off on him. He told him that the Jeffersons was his show. Plus, he was the first black person to appear on his show, which was All in the Family, and he should have more lines or the same amount of lines as George and Weezy have on the show. He told Norman Lear if he doesn't get more lines, that he was quitting the show, right? And you know what Norman Lear said after all that? He said, okay, I'll let you out your contract. Shook his hand and walked away. Wow. Cold-blooded, man. Because the rumors were that he quit the show, but according to Jimmy Walker, who witnessed the whole conversation, he said he was fired from the show. Wow. And that's when they replaced him with the actor Damon Evans, who ended up doing the role for 4 years. You know what's crazy? They replaced him with a guy with the same last name. They was born the same year, just weeks apart, because Mike was born November 3rd and Damon was born November 24th. But here's the crazy part about Damon, right? Damon Evans, right? He said he hated the role. And if he could do it all over, he would have refused the role because, see, Damon Evans was already a well-known actor in the industry and actually a successful opera singer. And at the time, he was just becoming aware that he was gay. He was a gay man. And the conflict of the expectations of Hollywood, and the role of Lionel placed him in an enormous emotional, psychological, and spiritual conflict with himself. Plus, he got tired of fans coming up to him saying, are you Lionel number 1 or are you Lionel number 2 on the show? He said he got tired of that. Well, anyway, back to Mike Evans, right? So they kicked him off the show. He did go on, but Mike Evans did go on to star in some movies, but he never really got the chance to be a big star on screen, though. I mean, he was on a show called Rich Man, Poor Man. He was on another show called The Streets of San Francisco, and look, Mike did return. He did return back on the Jefferson show for a while, but he ended up leaving again later on. Now, after that, that's when Mike, he decided to get into real estate. He became a real estate investor and owned a lot of properties in California. They say over 200 acres. Wow, at that time. But on December 14th, 2006, Mike Evans died from throat cancer at his mother's house. And they say his death was pretty bad because he was a smoker. And he died without his tongue in his mouth, according to his daughter. Wow. That's sad, man. It's crazy because him and Eric Monte, before he died, was working on a Good Times movie too. And Mike Evans also had two daughters. He had two daughters, one named Carlene and another one named Tammy, that he never claimed to the day he died, even after taking the blood test. His daughter Carlene said he refused to believe he was her father and told her that his brother might be the father. Wow. And she said she used to visit him when she was young and remembers that he lived a very isolated life. She said he lived in the desert in California and had his own house that he built himself with. Like he had farm animals on there. He had his own water, his own electricity and everything, she say. But still to this day, she brags to people that she is his daughter. And she don't hold no grudges, even though he denied her. But now that he's dead, though, I think he really appreciates her spiritually because her faith in God led her to his house out there in California. And she found out that he owned like over 200 acres of land, which was taken from him because no one paid the taxes. And his house had been robbed and ransacked when she went inside the house. When she went out there, right? Look, she had no money when she went to go check on his estate, whatever. No money for a hotel. So she ended up staying in the house for a few days. And she had to sleep in the same room where he died. And look, she said some weird stuff was happening that night. Like the lights started flickering. Some toys in there started moving and talking. A bunch of scary stuff started happening, right? She said it felt like his spirit talked to her, asking her to save his home, which was about to be foreclosed. And when she started going through all his papers that was scattered everywhere in the house, some was all outside just flying around, paper everywhere, she ended up finding his writing guild paper that showed his ownership for the show Good Times. Wow. And she now owns the intellectual property rights to Good Times because Mike and Monte had 50% creator credit on that show, which means ownership of an actual concept. They created a show, so nobody can recreate the show without dealing with the creators. And now with her in control, they were supposed to do the Good Time movies. I remember them advertising and everything back in like years ago, maybe 2012. They're supposed to do the Good Times movie, but she said the people who wanted to shoot the movie wanted to own her share, which was the 50% she got from her father and Eric Monte. So she didn't want to give up the rights. She wanted to license it to them, but they wanted 100% ownership of it. And she said no. That's good for her too, man. Standing her ground. Good for her. That's why the Good Time movie was never made. She's not giving them 100%. They want to own it. She's trying to license it to them. They license everything up. Man, it's crazy, man. But anyway, so that's what happened with Mike Evans, man. 57 years old. 57 years old. Rest in peace, Mike Evans.